next presenter, Glen Burridge. He is Executive Director of European Federation of Geologists. He is, with the background, a geologist himself. He knows the industry, he knows the disciplines very well, a lot better than myself. And he is representing European Federation of Geologists, who's based in Brussels for decades. They had very close connections with the European Commission. They have been involved in a number of several EU-funded projects and presenting their views and the discipline that we are representing. So with this, I would like to leave the floor to Glen for hearing his views on the energy transition and the geoscience disciplines. Glen?
Good afternoon. You can hear me loud and clear?
We can hear you.
Excellent.
And hopefully we will see it.
Pick up on something that Asli just said. 50 years, any of those of us who are trained in and working in the earth sciences could have easily believed that in the world was fairly clear-cut. Things on the horizon, on the far horizon for those who look closely, but you could be forgiven as if they really were not imminent. For those of us who are working and training to be geoscientists in the 2020s, absolutely no longer the case. What is being is about to change significantly, and there's a new flavor to the hazards that we need to mitigate against. Predict the future, but how European is going to respond to this, there are major concerns and huge opportunity. And in this talk, I just want to really give just some ideas about a possible recipe session we can best serve you moving forward, the people who lead it. So before I do that, I just want to introduce you to the European Federation of Geologists in case you don't know anything about it. So I'll just pop that slide forward. Well, while the slide is turning over, perhaps I can just run you through what, there we go. EFG's 6 strategic areas are. So at the heart of it is, of course, our members. We have 26 members across Europe. These are the professional geological associations of Europe, and they are at the heart of what we do. And they around about 45,000 individual geologist members. Professional expertise. This is how EFG got going in the first place. It was an initiative among the larger professional associations to create a common title that could be used across Europe. That's still absolutely at the heart of what we do also, the Geologist title. Allied to that now, we do mentoring. We are about to launch a coaching program, and next year we hope to get into training provision. Something really unique we have is panels of experts across 9 disciplines, right across geology. They are there to supply information directly into the Commission and any other authority or body that needs that kind of expertise. We have, as Liz pointed out, a number of projects that we run, 7 or 8 on the go these days, and they everything from minerals, geothermal, and a lot of sustainability questions. We often fulfill the dissemination part of those projects. These lead neatly onto communication. We do our very best to tell the world about the interesting happening in geology, and we do that through a very large network, working with our sister federations across the globe, industry contacts, and, for instance, our friends at EAGE in other parts of geosciences. So just to move to the slide which you already got to, our mission is really to represent the geological associations of Europe, promote excellence in the application of geoscience, create public awareness, and protect the environment, public safety, and responsible resource use. So one way to think about us is that we are really a public relations agency for professional geologists in Europe. Now, in my title slide, I suggested we're living in extraordinary times. And so why does now matter? Next slide, please. Now matters because right now we have the attention as natural scientists and earth scientists of global leaders. Our messages are coming out of their lips. There is no planet B. This is only heightened by COVID. This has been a relatively small window in time when a dramatic moment when people have started to see what happens if we take away a lot of the aspects of modern society and we pause for a moment. I think the effect of this cannot be underestimated. But this is a temporary window, and for the moment we have their attention, and we have very prominent events like COP26 coming up. But we have to make the most of this because other things will inevitably come in, and we have to make the most of this attention. The next slide, please. In practice, what does this mean? The energy transition. Now, to meet the climate goals that are being expressed within the Green Deal and other ambitions, and remember net zero is just one yardstick here that can be used and may even be insufficient. But right now, look at that diagram, that comes from the International Energy Agency. It's now in the 2020s where we need to pivot. Now we can argue all day long about what happens off to the right-hand side and which new greener energy we slice into the mix. But the fact is the change needs to happen now. That steady climb we've had up till now needs to stop and it needs to reverse. We need to get on with it now. As climatologists will tell you, in many ways, their job is largely done. They've passed the uncomfortable message, and it's now time for geoscientists, our engineering colleagues, innovators and investors, and you'll see a lot of attention on this at COP26, to get on with the energy transition. And it is an opportunity. Next, please. This again is a slide from IEA. I could have pulled out all sorts of other graphs, but this one's quite startling. It is only a model. It's a representation of what will need to happen in the next 30 years to oil supply and to critical minerals to get to net zero. Now just look at that reversal. There's a lot of people walking around saying oil is still going to be there. Yes, it is. But if we are to achieve what is being aimed for here at a global strategic macro scale, then there's going to be some big changes. A lot of people, I'm sure, will critique the columns on the right-hand side. Solar and wind are not going to solve all our problems. There's going to be need for all sorts of things, and we hope there's going to be a far larger role for geothermal and various varieties of hydrogen, for instance. But change is coming. Whatever those numbers are on the y-axis, we're going to almost certainly have a lot less oil flowing around, possibly less gas, we don't know. That's a much more open question. And critical minerals, and particularly for Europe, that is a screaming priority. Next, please. And if we don't tackle these things, we'll be in for bigger shocks. So the EU Green Deal, and within that there's much thinking about our relationship with the planet, and that's orientated around 2050. So let's consider what will matter for geoscience in these next 3 decades. Next, please. For a moment, let's just reel back to what mattered in the last 30 years. So when I was going through university, we had this really a triangle which consisted of people. That's our people and the people we serve. And there was two main things. You can pretty much put all of geology into one of two buckets. You're either producing resources, and in the last 30 years, that has really been either petroleum or mining, certainly in the public's eye. There's lots of other things we do as well, but those were the two most prominent resources, aside, you say, water as well. And then we had hazards, and the perennial hazards have always been there. So think of this triangle where we are serving and acting through our people to tackle those two areas. Now, next slide is about what will the next 30 years look like. So hopefully you can see, there we go. So what's going to matter in the next 30 years? I think it's going to be exactly the same. We are going to have to extract resources or recycle them. We're going to have hazards, and we're going to have to deal with people. We're going to have to grow our own people, and we have to deal with society. What's going to change is those people. There's going to be new generations with different visions of the world. The resources themselves are going to change. Is that energy transition plot and the way we go about looking for them. There's going to be all sorts of new novel tools. And perhaps on the hazard side, this gives us some pause for thought about how we monitor hazards, and the fact that we live in a much more complex, connected, and some would say uncertain world means that perhaps we should widen our scope of the black swans that may come out from the ends of the curve. So key message is here, the essential elements remain the same, but what's within them is going to change. Next, please. Our ability to interpret the Earth has come on in amazing strides over the last 30 years in particular, and this will continue and no doubt accelerate. But the rocks never lie, and we do need to continue to get away from our computers and go see what geological reality looks like. So I think that is a strong message to continue to make. Digitalization is a tool, but we still need to remember what we got into this for and where our unique capacity and capabilities are. And it's in interpreting the rocks that make up the Earth. Now let's look about that in a little more detail. A concept to try and pull this together and think about the relationship between is the Earth battery concept. I want to thank my colleague Jeff McKinley for introducing me to this. At the heart, we know that as geoscientists, we are either trying to optimize a responsible use of resources, or we're trying to mitigate hazards on the negative side. That pretty much everything we do is within that. We try and do that through quality science. We then need to communicate that to the wider world. And now we have this, you might say, thinner layer of digitalization around it. Now, everything we need to be good at is on that diagram, I would argue. And that is what we need to focus on in the next 3 decades. Next, please. And if we want to capitalize on this and get the Earth battery firing away, we need to understand what our customers want. Now, as professional geoscientists, we tend to think, and certainly it's been the case throughout my career, working within geoscience, that essentially we have 2 constituencies that we need to practically worry about. One are engineers, because we are always in the service of engineers, and we're going to have to build something from our models. And who's paying? In reality, though, when you consider the profession as a whole, and this is critical at this point, is to understand during these major changes that the energy transition will invoke, we absolutely need to consider the wider picture of the people who will frame, determine, and shape the role of geoscience in the coming, let's say, half a century. So that means communities, means the media, and ultimately policymakers. And we need all of these people on our side. So next, please. And what all of our customers want, in one form or another, is assurance. So engineers, what do engineers want? Just give a quick nudge on the slide. Thanks, Leslie. Now, these are people with a very different culture and perspective on life to us. We know that well. They understand the uncertainty we're dealing with and can respect our scenarios and the value options we give them. But at the end of the day, they have to build one thing. So we need to give them a strong argument for that choice and the tolerances they can accept. Next up, investors. Now, you might think of them effectively as the engineers of money. They similarly want good options to choose from. They like a good story, but ultimately they want to see a well thought through plan for how to assess their own up and down sides. Now, within the framework of the EU's Green Deal, this will increasingly include social and environmental cost benefits. And for those working in the UK, something similar will be here soon. So if it's not the EU's Green Deal, it's something in the same spirit. Now, a unique, powerful opportunity for us as environmental scientists, because that's how, in some respects, they'll regard us, or sustainability experts. It's not just now for us to advise on internal asset value of these geologically driven projects. Let's try and be imaginative. Can we assure green bonds? Can we produce sustainability plans? And what about public funded infrastructure projects? And within the Green Deal, there is something known with the not very attractive title of the taxonomy, but essentially it's the format within which the EU is looking to encourage sustainable investment. And I know a lot of our colleagues in the mining industry are quite excited by this, and they see it not as a threat, but very much an opportunity to do things the right way. Next up is the media. And what the media needs is content. So for journalists, this means what is newsworthy. Documentaries and longer features are essentially an extension of this. Give me the bigger story of what is changing. And we are the custodians of a story which is 4.56 billion years old. We hold the keys to the library of that greatest story ever, if you like, of planet Earth. And looking forward, we hold the keys also to the solutions of these planet-sized problems that humanity currently faces. So it's time for us to get out there and start telling those stories. Next up, the public. What are they looking for? Well, I think you could sum it up essentially excellence and inspiration. And I would take the case of aviation in the 20th century. Look at the state of aviation in maybe the 1930s, even the 1950s, and look where it's got to in the 21st century, where the journey to the airport is far more dangerous than the actual flight you're taking into the Earth's atmosphere. Seek inspiration from that. And within inspiration, I mean things like geotourism could be very powerful. We've got to find ways to not just give out facts, but to truly engage and excite the public about what we're doing. Because we are going to be solution providers. And then next is the policymakers themselves. So this brings us to our representatives and their supporting officials who are crafting Europe's legislative and political environment. Just imagine what it takes to stand up in front of hundreds of ambitious policymakers with millions of viewers watching every move on a topic you're not necessarily an expert on, and having to make declarations and set out plans for action. These are things which will affect many millions of people's lives for a generation or more. They need expert advice and they need reassurance of the facts, the uncertainties, and what are the right questions and to ask and the right decisions to frame. And for everything we do with the planet, this is the role we can play. So I want to leave you with a vision, a recipe if you like. So next slide, please. Because we as geoscientists potentially hold the destiny of this societal change. We can shine, but we need to act in good faith and embrace both this framework that's being set out by pioneering European Commission and others, and the uncertainty this transition represents. So in the next slide, I'll give you some ideas of what that might look like. So recognize we live in extraordinary times. So for our profession, our society, for the life-supporting systems on this planet, we are uniquely placed as earth scientists or environmental scientists, as custodians of that science, act and advise. There's no time to be shy. We have that library of the planet's past in our heads, in our data sets, and we can help the world's decision makers map out the immediate future. Our ultimate job certainly at EFG, but I think the profession as a whole should take it on, is to engage with the outside world. This is the one skill we need to be really good at. We are specialists in big projects, in uncertainty, and making connections. So let's use those skills to try and shape this new world. And I'll leave you just with 3 questions to think about. Right now, where should we be looking? In 5 years, what will we be glad we started in 2021? And what will success look like? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to look at the audience here if there are any questions for Glen for this interesting presentation. I think he captured also very well coming from the EU policies, the Green Deal, and the role of geosciences and engineers in the changing world in the energy transition. And one thing which Glen had in his presentation was, in the energy transition, you see a bigger need of minerals, critical raw materials. So, and he also mentioned there are some tax schemes. It was mentioned earlier, there are some funding opportunities as well. So tomorrow we will be talking more details on some of the success stories coming from those funds, from those collaborations, that how academia and the stakeholders come together to develop new technologies to be more clean and environmental friendly to reach these goals. So topics will be touched more in detail tomorrow. But for now, Glen, what is the key message would like to convey here as a geologist yourself? You mentioned quite a few interesting things, but what should be the takeaway from your presentation today to give the inspiration to those who are here with us in the room and who are listening us online?
I suppose it depends to some extent on where you are in your career. Those who are earlier in their career have much more chance to modulate that career and to depart, to take different paths. It's more challenging when you're further down the line. But those who have that greater experience, of course, have a wealth of skills and knowledge which they can apply to it. I think it really is about waking up to what is happening, and the change is going to happen anyway. So for some people, for instance, if you're working in a large operator right now, you may find that you're swept up by it. You're simply moved to new businesses that are working in these areas. Others, you're working in consultancy in the service companies. You're going to need to be nimble, and you're going to, at the same time, see the strategic direction and come up with, what is required to address that. It may be a time when I think for a lot of people, looking at what is going on in the policy arena is a wiser thing to do than it's perhaps been the case for the average geoscientist in the last few decades. Those who are able to move first and see the opportunities are going to be those who are going to shape things. So that would be my one piece of advice, I think, is to keep your eyes out, see what's happening, because things are moving.
Thank you very much, Glen, for that. I really would like to thank you once again for being here today. I know that you're going to join us in Amsterdam here tomorrow. So we will be having the opportunity to to foster on these ideas and the collaboration together as two organizations working in the same line of business and serving the same community. Really appreciate it, and thank you very much. For those who would like to be in touch with Glen as well, via me, you can always reach him. So thanks again, Glen. Looking forward to meeting you tomorrow.
Absolutely. And if anybody wants to collar me tomorrow in a friendly way, then I'll be walking around the conference.
Thanks again. Now, moving on from Glen, I would like to have the spotlight on Mr. Frank Wouters. He is